Okay, simple summary. I'm going to try to combine two things into one, but still keep it short. Good luck to me. Um, Talking today about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and how it had an impact on Reconstruction. The reason I want to keep the second part of it short is that history is the study of what happened, not what might have happened. So we don't really 100% know how Reconstruction would have gone if Lincoln had lived. We can only talk about what his plans were as we knew of them up till April 14th, 1865. Okay, so for the assassination itself. Separate from policy, this was a tragedy. Obviously, there had never been an American president killed. A lot of people, it didn't seem as if it was an American thing, that it wouldn't have occurred to people up to this point that a president might be shot. I don't know why people thought that. Somebody tried to kill Andrew Jackson 30 years earlier, but it was a shocking event. So, to understand the tragedy, you kind of have to talk about the years that led up to that night at Ford's Theater, because Lincoln suffered through the Civil War. He carried the burdens of the war on his shoulders. Now, not to the extent of a soldier in the Union Army who had to actually fight and die, but as much as any president or politician can. If you look at pictures of Abraham Lincoln in 1861, when he became president, and see a picture of him in 1865, only 4 years later, it is shocking. It is absolutely shocking, the difference. The war consumed him, and that word, consumed, is one he used. The strain was unbearable. He would spend long nights across the street from the White House in the telegraph office of the War Department, waiting for dispatches from the front, waiting for news of the war. He, like everybody else, hoped the war would be over quickly and was distressed the longer it went on. He was constantly pushing his generals to attack, to get on with it, to try to end the war. And then the war finally ended in April of 1865 when Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox. Now, that wasn't the official end of the war, but that kind of was the end of the war. And Lincoln only had a few days to enjoy it, for his mood to gradually lift. And on Good Friday of April 1865, April 14th, he was actually in a pretty good mood. The strains of the war had begun to lift. And he presided over a few meetings that morning, and people noted his improved demeanor. That afternoon, he went on a carriage ride out in the country with his wife, just the two of them, which sounds crazy, right? No Secret Service, no protection, but that's how it was then. And his wife, who was, how can I put this delicately, a difficult personality, said to him, like, I don't think I've ever seen you this happy. And he said, well, I cannot talk. And well, it may be so, because I consider this day the day the war has ended. And so they spoke about things that they didn't normally talk about. They talked about their son who had died a few years ago. They talked about what Lincoln wanted to do when his presidency was over. He was talking about traveling when he finally left office. It was a happy day for him. And he was scheduled to go to the theater that night and didn't really want to go. All during the war, it was one of the few things that he could do to escape the stress of the war and of being president during the war. And he would go to Ford's Theater, he would go to Grover's Theater, another theater in Washington, and he'd get a couple of hours of an escape. Keep in mind, it's 1865. There's such thing as movies, right? He's not streaming things on Netflix. The theater's all you had. And so he liked it. But he didn't need a coping mechanism that night because the war was over, right? He actually kind of wanted to hang out and talk to some of his friends and colleagues. But he knew and said that people would be disappointed if he didn't come. It was in the newspapers that he was going to be there. And so he got into the carriage and with his wife and their guests to the theater, and rode off. And there's a spooky thing about this. There was a man, one of his bodyguards is a man named Crook, and he always used to say to President Lincoln at night would say, "Good night, Crook." Whenever Crook went off shift, he would wish him good night. And apparently, and everything I've read indicates this actually happened, on the night of April 14th, when he got into the carriage to leave, to go to Ford's Theater for what turned out to be the last time, instead of saying goodnight, he said, "Goodbye, Crook." Now, I don't know what that means. It might not have even happened, but we think it did. It's probably just a coincidence. The other thing that I would point out to you is that a few weeks earlier, Lincoln dreamed of his own assassination. He didn't picture it at the theater. He didn't know about John Wilkes Booth. He didn't see it unfolding, but he had a dream in which he came across a coffin in the White House and wanted to know who's dead in the White House. And the guard said the president, he was killed by an assassin. And that we do know happened, because it is a well-documented story that Lincoln told to his wife, unwisely, by the way, and to several of the people in his cabinet. That absolutely happened. So he went to the theater. The show, they got there a little late, and they stopped the show when the president arrived, and they raised the house lights, and everybody's cheering. Keep in mind, the Civil War has just ended. Washington, D.C. is party time, right? Everybody's in a great mood, and Lincoln's a hero. And it's ironic, of course, if you think about it, that he's going to the theater, because this ending is going to be Shakespearean. At the moment of his greatest triumph, he will be struck down. Because he was seated, the lights were lowered, the play resumed, and then there was a disturbance. People didn't, what's going on? They heard a sound, they heard yelling up by the box. Lincoln and his party were seated in the presidential box over the stage. And the people in the audience didn't understand what had happened. And then a man leaped onto the stage and landed awkwardly and broke his ankle. And now people are, is this part of the show? What's happening here? And the man was John Wilkes Booth. What happened is, because he was a celebrity, he was an actor, he had performed in that theater, people knew who he was. When he went up the little hallway to the presidential box, nobody stopped him. Nobody thought anything of it. And the police officer that was assigned to protect the president was not there. This is hard to believe, but the police officer, who's a man named William Parker, who's buried in an unmarked grave because people would vandalize it, was probably the worst police officer in all of Washington, D.C. And he tells one story, which is, Lincoln said I could go, which is, I don't know, it might very well be true. Lincoln was way too casual about his own security. Walked around without guards all the time, rode by himself in D.C. on horseback. People could wander in and out of the White House. Parker may be well in what, man, I cannot talk today. Parker may very well have been telling the truth. But regardless, he wasn't there. Whether he was down watching the show, which is amazing if that's where he was, or even worse, if he was in the tavern next door drinking. I'm trying to get resettled here without stopping the video, sorry. It doesn't matter, he wasn't at the door. He wasn't protecting the president. And so when Booth came to the door, there was no protection. And he crept in, and he withdrew a single shot Derringer pistol, and he shot Abraham Lincoln in the back of the head and escaped. And once the people in the audience realized what was going on, it was complete pandemonium. And Mrs. Lincoln is screaming and crying, and not a terribly mentally healthy woman to begin with, and this probably pushed her over the edge. Lincoln was carried across the street because the doctor that came to his side realized there was no way that they could take him back to the White House. That it would be too rough a journey. he would die on the way. And so Abraham Lincoln died in a boarding house across the street from Ford's Theater the next morning. And this took him off the stage, so to speak. I don't mean literally the stage. I mean the world stage, the stage of public life. It replaced probably our greatest president with someone who is almost certainly one of our worst presidents. We went from Abraham Lincoln to Andrew Johnson. And Johnson wasn't even sober the morning he became president. And he had never met with Lincoln, only once actually, since he had become vice president. He was not a member of Lincoln's party. He was not prepared to be president. And he, put it simply, did not do a good job. What this meant for Reconstruction policy, because the country was going to have to be reconstructed, literally put back together, bring the South back into the Union, meant that we being the United States, went from Lincoln's policy, which was lenient and gentle, but principled, right? And it was about letting the South back in, not being too harsh on them, but also making sure that people of color were treated fairly. We're gonna abolish slavery. We're gonna make sure that they have opportunities. We're gonna treat them like people. We're gonna treat them like citizens. And I'm gonna use a harsh word here, but it's an accurate word. Lincoln's policy of lenient but principled was replaced by Johnson's policy of lenient but racist. Was he lenient on the South? Yes. He was from Tennessee. Gee, I wonder why he was lenient on the South. He was a Southerner, and he understood that part of it, but he was also, frankly, a racist. I know it's a harsh word, but it's fair and it's true. And so all of Lincoln's concern for the people that we had just fought a war to free went out the window. So there were two different kinds of Reconstruction. I'm running low on time here. I'm not going to tell you those things. I'll leave that to the written lecture. But basically what I'm saying is the personal tragedy of Lincoln's assassination took away a great president and replaced him with, at best, a guy. And it really wasn't even that good. Okay, write this up. Use your own words. Make sure that you use the required assignment template, which has the cover page and that sort of thing. But mainly, more important than anything, make sure that you are making it obvious that you listened to this video, didn't go Google it or Chat GPT it, and that you understand what I'm saying. That's the task. Okay, bye-bye.